We discovered the 7 continents in a completely backwards order, and the way it actually happened is so weird it will change how you think about human exploration forever. The last continent discovered was not some tiny island. It was literally the second largest landmass on Earth. How is that even possible? Here is what nobody tells you about discovering continents. We always hear about Columbus discovering America or explorers finding new lands, but the reality is far more complicated and honestly kind of absurd. The order humanity discovered these massive pieces of land has almost nothing to do with their size or proximity to civilization, and everything to do with politics, technology, and pure luck. Let's start at the beginning with Africa, because obviously that is where humanity began. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago, so technically Africa was not discovered, we were just there. But here is the thing. For the longest time, humans only knew a tiny portion of the continent. The northern parts along the Mediterranean were mapped by ancient civilizations, but the interior remained a complete mystery. Sub-Saharan Africa remained unknown to most of the world until European explorers started pushing inland in the 1800s. So Africa gets the #1 spot, but not because anyone discovered it. We just lived there first and slowly figured out how massive it actually was over thousands of years. Next up is Asia, and this makes total sense geographically. Early humans migrated out of Africa into Asia around 70,000 years ago, spreading across the Middle East, India, China, and eventually Southeast Asia. Ancient trade routes like the Silk Road connected different parts of Asia to Africa and later Europe, so people knew this continent existed and was huge. But here is where it gets interesting. Even though Asia was known early, nobody had a complete picture of it. The northern parts of Siberia were not fully explored until Russia pushed eastward in the 1600s and the 1700s. So yes, Asia was discovered second in terms of human migration, but fully mapping it took a very long time. Europe comes in third, and this is where things start getting politically messy. Europe was not really discovered, so much as it was settled by waves of migrations from Asia and Africa. The ancient Greeks and Romans mapped the Mediterranean and most of Europe, but the far northern regions like Scandinavia and Iceland were not fully known to southern civilizations until later. The ironic thing about Europe is that Europeans would go on to discover most of the other continents, even though Europe itself is tiny compared to Asia and Africa. It is not even really a separate continent. It is just a big peninsula attached to Asia. But we count it separately because that is what Europeans decided, and they were the ones making the maps. Now here's where the order gets wild. North America and South America were discovered by Europeans in 1492 when Columbus landed in the Bahamas. But wait, indigenous people had been living in the Americas for at least 15,000 years, possibly longer. So obviously they discovered it long before Columbus. From a European perspective, which is how we typically measure these things, the Americas were not known until the late 1400s. And you know what's crazy? Columbus died thinking he'd reached Asia. He had no idea he'd stumbled onto entire continents. It was not until Amerigo Vespucci explored the coast of South America in the early 1500s that Europeans realized these were completely new land masses. That is why they are called America, after Amerigo, not Christopher Columbus. That has to sting if you are Columbus. The Americas blow the discovery order wide open because these are massive continents inhabited by millions of people, yet they were unknown to the Eastern Hemisphere for thousands of years. The isolation was so complete that when Europeans finally arrived, they brought diseases that wiped out up to 90% of the native population. It is absolutely devastating. But here is the kicker. The Americas were not even the last continents discovered. Nope. That honor goes to two places that are absolutely mind-blowing when you think about it. Australia was first discovered by Europeans in 1606, when Dutch explorer Willem Janszoon landed on the western coast. But like the Americas, indigenous Australians had been there for at least 65,000 years, making them one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. Australia is so isolated that no ancient civilization from Africa, Europe, or Asia ever stumbled upon it. It is literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by ocean. The British did not start seriously exploring and colonizing Australia until James Cook mapped the eastern coast in 1770. Even then, the interior of Australia remained a mystery for decades because it is one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Deserts, extreme heat, dangerous wildlife. The whole continent seemed designed to kill you. But Australia still is not the last continent discovered. You know what is? Antarctica. This is where the story gets absolutely insane, because Antarctica is the fifth largest continent. It is covered in ice, and it was not officially discovered until 1820. Think about that for a second. We are talking about a landmass bigger than Europe, and humanity did not even know it existed until 200 years ago. Why? Because it is at the bottom of the world, surrounded by some of the roughest seas on the planet, and it is completely uninhabitable. There was literally no reason for anyone to go there until sailing technology advanced enough to survive the journey. The weird part is that ancient Greek philosophers theorized there must be a southern continent to balance out the northern land masses. They called it Terra Australis, which means southern land. But it was pure speculation. No one had actually seen it. When European explorers started sailing into southern latitudes in the 1700s, they encountered massive icebergs and brutal conditions which suggested land was nearby. Captain James Cook circumnavigated Antarctica in the 1770s without ever actually seeing the continent because the sea ice extends so far out. He got close, but the ice blocked him. It was not until 1820 that three separate expeditions, one Russian, one British, and one American, all spotted the Antarctic coast within days of each other. Even then, actually landing on Antarctica and confirming it was a continent took more years. The first confirmed landing was not until 1895. Here is something that will blow your mind. Antarctica is the only continent with no native human population and no history of indigenous peoples, ever. The environment is so extreme that humans never settled there naturally. The only people who go to Antarctica are scientists and researchers, and they can only survive there with modern technology. So let's recap the order. Africa first, because we evolved there. Then Asia through migration, Europe next as an extension of Asian settlement, the Americas in 1492 from a European perspective, Australia in 1606, and finally Antarctica in 1820. The discovery order had basically nothing to do with size or importance, and everything to do with where humans happened to migrate and what technology allowed us to reach. The craziest part is we discovered the continents in almost completely random order based on geography, ocean currents, wind patterns, and which civilizations had boats good enough to cross massive oceans. If the Pacific had been easier to navigate, we might have found Australia before the Americas. If Antarctica had been warmer, it might have been discovered thousands of years earlier. The whole thing shows human exploration is not a logical, progressive march across the globe. It is chaotic, driven by accidents, competition between nations, technological limitations, and sometimes pure dumb luck. We found entire continents by mistake, and we missed others that were right there for centuries. Let me know which continent you think should have been discovered first. Hit the comments.